Hi, I'm Maria Cristina Villaseñor, the Programming Director of the New York International Children's Film Festival. Excuse me, and having a little frog in my throat then. I'm so happy to welcome you to STEM Stories on Screen, the final event in NYICFF's third annual Children's Media Industry Forum series towards an inclusive future. Whether you're an educator, a change maker, a science and film nerd, or just love a good lab coat, today's talk is for you. We'll be discussing the profound impact that representation can have in encouraging science-based careers and study for kids, and in particular, the outsized impact of representing diverse stories on screen for women and girls to pursue STEM careers. We're extremely grateful to today's exciting panel participants who you'll hear from shortly, and to you, our audiences, and to all that make NYICFF's nonprofit mission possible. This year's industry forum is generously supported by by New York City's Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. We like to think it's all NYICFF's, but it's a big city with so many thriving nonprofit film organizations, and we're proud to be supported by the Mayor's Office alongside them. Humanities New York, Unifrance, Netflix, and Silvergate. Today's event is also importantly supported and inspired by Science on Screen, an initiative of the Coolidge Corner Theatre with generous support from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. As always, we want to hear from you and invite you to connect and participate throughout today's conversation by saying hello in the chat, dropping your thoughts in there, and also later on adding your questions into the Q&A section, or you can also do it in the chat function, and we'll be sure to share your questions with our panelists. So now I'm thrilled to introduce our panel and our amazing panelists. So joining us today are our esteemed panelists, Cary Grant, award-winning writer and showrunner and executive producer of Netflix's Ada Twist Scientist. Hi, Cary. Nick Yulo, award-winning filmmaker, director of NYICFF's 2022 Horizon, Nights in New York. Those are two different films that were featured in our Girls POV Science on Screen series, and also a writer and illustrator. Liam Cohen, UC Santa Barbara PhD candidate in experimental condensed matter physics and a former NYICFF goer, and Scott Cohen, actor, educator, and a member of NYICFF's board of directors and parent to Liam. Hi there. So we are going to have a series of conversations with our different panelists and posing some very specific questions and then some big, broad questions about the impact of STEM on screen. And I'm also going to dive a little bit deeper into everyone's bio as I introduce them. So first, we're going to get started with Scott and Liam Cohen, because this is a bit of the origin story of the impact that science on screen can have on the pursuit of STEM as a career. So I'm going to start just by giving you this very impressive resume for both Scott and for Liam individually. Scott Cohen is recognized from his many character portrayals in television, theater, and film, receiving rave reviews for his wide range of performances. He has a loyal following for the TV roles of Max Medina on Gilmore Girls, Wolf in the 10th Kingdom, and Harry Denby on NYPD Blue. He's currently working with the Directors Company on Anastasia Trina's play Seagulls on Sullivan Street. And in addition to a prolific career as a performer, Scott is also an adjunct professor at Hunter College in New York City. And Liam Augustus Cohen is a PhD candidate in experimental condensed matter physics. So we have a real scientist with us today, working at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He received his bachelor's in physics and electrical engineering and computer science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and his master's in physics from UC Santa Barbara. Liam grew up in New York City and attended NYICFF regularly, where he developed a love of Miyazaki and science. So welcome, Scott and Liam.
Hey, everybody. Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
It's so fantastic to have you here. And thank you again for being willing to join us. And I'm going to ask you to travel back in time about 20 odd years ago, would you say, Scott?
Yeah, about 24, 25 years ago.
So Scott has been with us pretty much from the beginning, and Liam, of NYICFF's history, basically, since we're celebrating our 25th year. And you attended, very importantly, an Astro Boy screening. So just to give everybody a little bit of a flavor of Tezuka Osamu's classic anime, Astro Boy, we're going to just start with a little clip, and then we're going to ask you to relate the story of that experience. So let's take a look at that clip now.
Time for your arithmetic lesson, Astro Boy. What's the answer?
6,020,000,000.
Right. No, just draw what you see, huh? Why, it's drawing a molecular structure. And so the year.
Wow.
All right.
So I could just say that Anna, my wife, I think was turned on to the festival the year before Astro Boy was at the festival, and then when we went the following year, Liam fell in love with the character of Astro Boy, who I think only not just having the capacity to be as like a computer and a superhero computer, but also the whole concept of I don't know if anybody knows the story, but Astro Boy was created from a horrific accident that happens with father and son, and Astro Boy is kind of a recreation of the sun. And so I remember very clearly way back then, Liam had an obsession with creating an elixir that would keep us living forever. Not sure if he's discovered that yet, but I'm waiting for it. But that's after that we got multiple whatever we could get our hands on at the video store back then of Astro Boy, and Liam fell in love with the character, and I have a story. I'm sticking to it. I believe that character and the concepts that were in that film really started him on his scientific journey, and has kind of led him to where he is today. Obviously, there's many things in between there. But just a quick little, I don't want to take up too much time, but just a quick little story. When he was 4 or 5 and he was in school, he dressed up as Astro Boy, where he would have this like pointy hair, and he really didn't care what he looked like. He was just like, I'm going to school as Astro Boy. And I remember Anna, my wife, saying to him, you might get a lot of flack for this, but he's like, I don't care. I'm Astro Boy. And she was very supportive of him, and sent him on his way, and he did it for I'd say about a week. He was Astro Boy. So anyway, that's the story.
Excellent. That's an excellent start to this, but let's hear your perspective, Liam, because we know that parents and children often have a slightly different idea of things, but also, it's interesting to think about this, what we assume to be a childish enthusiasm, but you took very seriously. So tell us about it.
Yeah, thanks. I actually was not that much different than what my dad was saying. I think like the thing about Astro Boy is this real like human aspect of it, right? The fact that, as my dad mentioned, it's about a father who loses his son in like a car accident, right, and tries to rebuild him. And that's, I think especially as a kid, having a deep love for my parents, and now as well. I'm not gonna try to, didn't end when I was a kid, but it's easy to understand as a child, like why you would want to reclaim something so important. And I think that kind of thing brings you in, connects with you at a very deep emotional level. And then I think at some point that's sort of what science is at its core. It's like a rage against the natural order of things, right? It's a desire to understand and break down matter into its fundamental constituents and manipulate it, right? Ultimately to better the world and push the boundaries of what's possible. So, I think that, you're brought in by this human aspect, with this, very relatable, easy to understand why it would be so important to this person to reclaim their son. And then it kind of brings you into this world of science and technology. And I think that it's sort of a very seamless transition for a young child that doesn't know anything about science, and bringing them into that world. So I think, yeah, I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to actually add to what my dad was saying, because it's sort of very accurate.
Yeah, and that was the inspiration. But it sounds like what you're saying is that it was very much this emotional connection to the power of science and about the sort of storytelling. So I'm interested in hearing from you both about how you sort of built on that, because Liam, I know that you have an ongoing interest in different representations of science on screen, different sort of anime related things. But Scott, also, if you could tell us about that sort of continuing exploration of the thematics, both on and off the screen, and sort of how you and your wife facilitated that dialogue with Liam.
Yeah, very simple. I have to give all the credit to my wife, really. I mean, she discovered, what was the name of it? Miss Frizzle.
The Magic School Bus.
Yeah, the Magic School Bus, which was a book and TV show all about science, which actually, I don't mean to compare, but I was watching some of Ada Twist's Scientist, and there were so many similarities in the concept of, like, creating science in these very simple ways, and, experiments and the scientific method, which I love that song in Ada Twist. And I think that kind of followed suit all the way through. I mean, and there was so many other things. I mean, but I mean, even as an older child for Liam, when the Iron Man came out, and Tony Stark was this character, and that's obviously a huge film, but it's Tony Stark was this MIT graduate and was created this world and created these these things. I mean, this also inspired him to discover exactly what he just said, which I cannot put into my own words even, but because I thought it was so clear and wonderful. The idea of taking the humanity and the human part of a film and translating that into science and technology, and we simply supported it. We simply gave him the access to these films, just like what NYICFF does, which is give access to children to see these things that could spark interest and spark inspiration.
And Liam, I'm interested in how you sort of came into your own in terms of that film going experience, and also just, sort of the broader kind of curiosity and exploration around both science and also the arts. It seems like that was very integral to your whole coming of age.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously I grew up in a very artistic family, so the exposure there was very natural.
You had a good foundation.
Yeah, a very good foundation. For sure.
Mildly.
very lucky to have that that kind of exposure. But I think really it's for me, I think I had a natural sort of predilection towards exploring different types of things and trying to mess with random buttons, and that kind of curiosity was honed very accurately, I think, by an inspiration to be like characters that have, like Tony Stark, for example, right? That's a great example, particularly as I got older, is, there's a person who's a hero, but, struggles with, a lot of personal flaws, right? Struggles with arrogance, and struggles with, a desire for control and those kinds of things. And those are very humanistic, fatal flaws that people have that manifest themselves very realistically in the struggle to do science. And I think relating to those was just made me want to be like those kinds of people, and work on my own issues and my own flaws, and do that through a scientific exploration, right? And trying to learn as much as I can. And I think it was really just about, you see a character that inspires you, and you just want to be like that person. I think it's like that for almost anything, right? It's like, why do kids want to be like an athlete, right? As well, they're very inspirational people. They go through a lot of struggle, and they try very hard, and they achieve incredible things. And I think kids want to be like that because they're incredible people. And I think seeing scientists in that kind of role on screen makes you want to be like that person. It just made it very natural for me to continue that interest. And then it sort of developed into a real desire to want to be a scientist, and that's all she wrote.
Or not yet.
Yeah. Continual development,
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm just curious, are you and your sort of cohort of budding scientists at UC Santa Barbara, do you talk about sort of the broader representation of science and popular culture, whether that's on screen or sort of more broadly in the media and things like that? Do you think about how to foster the next generation of scientists? Is that part of your conversation?
We do every so often when we're not, struggling to get a pipe to not break. But certainly, I mean, the thing that I think is really important, just as a departure from, the thing that I talk a lot about with my peers is sort of a departure. What we'd like to see in represented in the media is more of a realistic depiction of like what scientists have to go through on a day-to-day basis, particularly a departure from like the genius archetype. Because in reality, like none of us are able to calculate thermodynamic quantities in our heads so well that we can predict like when a fire will start, right? That's unrealistic, right? None of us are actually Tony Stark. You can't like make an Iron Man suit as much as we want to do that. But there's very
I think that's
real,
a good thing, maybe.
maybe, yeah. But there's very real struggles of, the career of a scientist is one that is fraught with failure and struggle and difficulty. And, you go into work every day and like you're trying to do something fundamentally that nobody's ever done before. That's what research is. And that's a difficult thing. And there's a very, human aspect again to like dealing with that adversity and dealing with that struggle. And, that's just the job part of it. There's plenty of other issues that can couple into that as well. And so we talk a lot about, at least between me and my peers, is that moving away from this as a character archetype, this like, this genius who is, the science is easy for them, right? That's the thing that is represented quite often in cartoons and movies and stuff. And often the issue is the things that the problems that they create, and then they have to sort of solve for themselves, right? That's a very common motif. But there's, I think, a real opportunity to explore characters where the science is the struggle for them, right? There's a passion to want to learn more about the universe and explore and try and uncover new ideas and again manipulate matter at its like fundamental constituent. But that's not easy, and I think the universe doesn't reveal its secrets so easily to anybody, and that's not something that we see depicted a lot, but could be really represented as a very human emotion, I think.
Absolutely. And thank you, Liam, for setting me up so beautifully to transition to Carrie Grant, because I think that she's done a phenomenal job at representing, the challenges of science and native twist scientists, and also just developmentally how you work through challenges. I think there's so many beautiful moments in native twist, and I'm excited to hear from you, Carrie. And I'm going to share your biography if you will be so generous to allow me a spot of time, because it's so wonderfully evocative of your career. Carrie Grant moved from her home in Jamaica at age 11 to live in New York with her family, where being an immigrant and feeling like an outsider led to poems and journals and a love of writing. A serendipitous internship at Nickelodeon led to a role as a script coordinator on the Backyardigans, which in turn led to a Nickelodeon writing fellowship in LA. She has since worked as a staff writer on shows such as Doc McStuffins, for which she won a Peabody Award, a Sentinel Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a Humanitas Prize, Disney's Elena of Avalor, and Mira Royal Detective. She served as a story editor on Nella the Princess Knight and is the executive producer and showrunner of Netflix's Ada Twist Scientist. And she is an 8-time Emmy nominee. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's fantastic to have you. I'm so excited to talk to you. I mean, you have, as I just mentioned, such an illustrious career in children's media. So tell us about stepping into Ada Twist and why it was important for you to help to bring this book series to life and give it its own distinctiveness as a show.
So I first encountered Ada a couple years ago. Netflix, had this book they wanted to adapt and asked me if I'd be interested. And at the time I wasn't available to do it. And then fast forward to a year later, where my former boss at Doc McStuffins, Chris Nee, came to me and asked me if I was interested in running Ada Twist. So it was like this full circle moment. It felt like I had to say yes. I really love the books. I think the books are really beautiful visually, but also, you know, starting out as a poet myself, I really love the poetry in the books, and I love the style, not just of the illustrations, but also like the fashion. You know, it's like something that is
love that A-line dress.
Love the A-line dress with the exposed zippers. And I loved that it focused on Ada asking why. The mythology of the book is that Ada didn't talk until she was 3 years old. And when she did, the first question she asked was why. And I love that because I related to it too as a kid who used to ask a lot of questions. And I remember being in high school and I was on the track team. And I remember this one particular practice, I was just asking a lot of questions. I just tend to ask a lot of questions. And my coach was like, oh my God, why do you ask so many questions? Just shut up and run. So I, you know, loved that about her. And I love that her family, while at first they were really exasperated and kind of tearing their hair out at her writing on the walls and doing crazy experiments around the house. And then by the end of the book, really came to support her and love her. So I just loved so many elements of the books. I thought it was, and seeing this little Black girl in the center of it, you know, being the smartest girl in the room, unapologetically, really appealed to me.
Fantastic. Let's take a minute now for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, and for everybody who wants to get re-excited about the beautiful look and feel of Ada, to take a look at a clip. So if we can roll the clip now.
I'll go press the button. You're probably wondering what's happening right now. Well, this is an experiment.
That was bananas.
And so is this. And I'm Ada Twist. We're scientists and best friends.
Ada Twist, scientist, connecting polka dots, cause this is scientist Ada Twist.
So fantastic. And such great energy and great songs, as Scott mentioned.
Thank you.
Love that through line.
I love that he loves the scientific method song. I love that.
And it's interesting to think about like Doc McStuffins, right? Also the importance of representation and, you know, showing this professionalism, this curiosity from an early age, of continuing that through. Tell us a little bit about really focusing on the science aspects of it. I know you worked with some really amazing consultants on it in the field. Tell us about how, you know, that sort of as a seminal idea really comes to fruition through your storytelling through the arc of the series.
Okay, so how do we work with our science consultants, or how do we conceive of the episodes and series?
I think it's, if you would be so generous as to share how you work with your science consultants and how you sort of conceive of a whole season of like that storytelling.
Yeah, so we of course started with the books as a jumping off point, and then, but you know, the books are pretty limited. So we had to figure out, how do we expand this world, and how do we keep the spirit of the books and the charm of the books and the core of the books, which is celebrating and studying science, engineering, and architecture. Because just to give everyone a brief overview, so the series follows Ada, Iggy, and Rosie. Ada Twist Scientist was one book in the series, Iggy Peck Architect was another book, and Rosie Revere Engineer was another book. So our series takes those three characters and they're best friends, and still very much kind of follow their own disciplines. So, you know, Ada is the kind of overall scientist of the group and the leader, and Iggy is really into architecture, and that kind of comes through in everything he does, also in things he says, how he speaks. Same thing with Rosie Revere as an engineer. She's sort of the engineer of the group. And one of the first things we did was to think about it as a show for kids that would be entertaining for kids, right? So that's the first thing. So centering the kids first. So these three best friends just going about their kid lives and looking at the world through a scientific lens, and, you know, incorporating architecture and engineering in it as well. early on, as we were conceiving of it, we thought it would be a good idea to bring science consultants in just to, help us with the accuracy, because we want to be whimsical and playful and fantastical, as kids love that stuff, but we also want it to be really accurate with the science. And so we brought two amazing consultants, Dr. Natoki Ford and Ali Ward. They were so amazing, I couldn't choose one to work with, so we just hired them both. And what's wonderful about these women is, in addition to just being accomplished scientists, Dr. Ford Natoki, she's a science educator. She's a scientist. She was a senior policy advisor in the Obama White House. She's a speaker. She speaks regularly about inclusion in STEM, diversity, equity, inclusion in STEM, imposter syndrome. She's just that's her wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. But also she and Ali were also very much in the arts. So it was it felt like the perfect marriage of science and art, because that's what we were trying to do with the show. Ali is also wonderful. She's a scientist and a science educator. She also has a podcast called Ologies, where she just explores all sorts of different science concepts and ideas. And what I loved, Ali was actually early on, when we were kind of having a kickoff meeting, just discussing what we wanted to talk about and what we wanted to explore, and how we were going to distill the science down in really simple ways to kids without dumbing down to them. One thing Ali said to the entire writer's room and our producers really kind of blew it out of the water, blew it wide open for us. And what she said was, like, when you write premises, don't worry about, where the science is in it or where the science is coming from, because science is in everything. And she said, think about food. You don't worry about whether or not there are ingredients in it. You just assume there are, because it's food. And then she made that kind of analogy to science, and then you could see it on the call. Everyone was like, wow, it just freed everyone. And we realized we could tell stories about literally anything. And so our process of working with them is, we worked with them really closely. Every time we wrote a premise, we would submit our premises to them just to see if they had any kind of glaring issues or agreed with sort of the direction we were taking. And then at every step of the way, we included them in the process. So at premise, at outline stage, at script stage, and we would have weekly meetings with them just to go over stuff. What turned out to be a really cool thing was that it wasn't just send these scientists this thing and have them look at it and make sure the science is accurate. It became more of a more holistic relationship between us. So, and like I said, because they're also involved in the arts, I believe Ali got a degree in cinema in college, as well as being a scientist, and Natoki also worked in the arts in LA early in her career. It became a holistic relationship where we were talking about just stories in general, and that would spark story. We just have conversations that would spark story ideas. And it was just it was a really fun process working like that. We became really close, working on this. Ali got me into, now I know that there's a science Twitter. I didn't know about science Twitter before any of this. I'm following all sorts of scientists now. And it opened me up personally to like the abundance of types of science. Like, it's kind of mind-blowing.
That's so fantastic. I feel so fortunate that you're joining all of us, because we were really curious and sort of seeing this idea of like creativity in the arts. There's no reason why that has to be different than the creativity that fuels sciences. And so it sounds like you just had this really organic, sort of mutually supportive universe of dialogue and really natural storytelling.
We did, yeah.
Fantastic. Can you tell us maybe about like one of the episodes or one of the scenarios that you particularly got a kick out of collaborating on together, or something that was your personal favorite?
Oh man, it's like choosing a favorite child.
I know. That's a terrible thing.
Hard. It's hard. Well, okay. I loved that nothing was impossible when it came to presenting scenarios to Ali and Atoki. Like we did an episode where Ada was tracking down the source of a stinky smell. And we
Which is a very real New York City problem. So I appreciate that.
We lifted that one directly from the books, but then it was just fun to explore with them, you know, stinky smells and how to contain them.
Chemical compositions.
Exactly. And we did a couple episodes on sound, you know, like sound waves, and music is a really big part of the show, not just in the original songs, but the way our characters are and their families are. They just like to dance, they like to celebrate. So it's just a big part of the show. So sound waves was something that I think was born organically from just how we are, you know, and how we were in the room. And then you'll see coming up in season 2 that we actually, Ali and Atoki are in one of the episodes.
What does that mean?
We made them kids and we made them animated and put them in the episode, because that's how much we just had such a good time, like I said, with them and working with them on this. And that was something that kind of, you know, we just decided to do for fun.
That's super exciting.
And
Can't wait to see made them
a literal part of the Ada universe.
Fantastic. When does the new season launch? Do we know yet? It's
gonna be I don't know the exact dates, but definitely early 2023.
Very exciting. We're going to be looking out for that. And also I'm wondering, you know, obviously throughout your career, and especially with Ada and everything that we're talking about, representation is so important and so at the core of this work that we do. So tell us a little bit about your thought process as you approach a new series or a new idea, and how you go about sort of centering diverse representation within the story.
Well, I feel like in my opinion, diverse representation is something that just comes naturally when thinking about the world and how many, you know, who is in the world. And I think that the issue is that a lot of shows don't accurately reflect the world and the diversity within it. So one thing, you know, being in a position of executive producer, you know, it's kind of the first time that I really had a chance to have a say or be a part of the conversation in that way. And I think for us, you know, working with Chris, Nee, and Higher Ground, it was just something that we all knew we wanted to do off the bat. So, you know, when thinking about new characters, we always thought about who this character is, how do we want to, you know, adding, building out a town and a world that is diverse, because that's the world. I know that that's the world I grew up in. I grew up in New York, you know, melting pot. My high school was incredibly diverse, you know, everybody from all walks of life, you know, Black, white, Italian, Dominican, Puerto Rican, African, Indian, like everybody was there. So I feel really fortunate that that's just the world that I've grown up in. My friends are a very diverse group of people. And so we just wanted to accurately reflect the world as it is, and not, rather than focusing on inclusion, we were just, we were not interested in exclusion. So, and that includes racial diversity, sexual orientation diversity, disability diversity. Found out working on the show that the disabled community is the largest minority. So we made an effort to really include characters with disabilities as a part of the world, as well as, like I said, sexual orientation, race, family structure. You know, Ada lives with both of her parents, they're married. Rosie lives with her single mom, and they get help from Rosie's great aunt Rose, who she's named after, to come and, you know, she watches her sometimes. And Iggy's parents are divorced, and so his parents are co-parenting, and he goes back and forth between their homes. So we just wanted to just reflect the world in whatever, you know, in its diversity as it is.
Yeah, so wonderful. Yeah, I mean, showing it as a mirror, as a true mirror of what your experiences are.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'm also curious to just hear a little bit about what you mentioned of stepping into the executive producer role. You know, you've been in the writer's room and an amazing writer for so many years. Tell us a little bit about that shift, and for folks that are maybe just starting to get their footing in the industry, navigating that.
I think it came, like, for me, it was gradual. You know, I worked for a lot of years as a staff writer, and I was really comfortable and happy with that. And then took the next step. You know, we're always thinking about what's the next step, where do I want to go, and took the next step in becoming a co-story editor on Nella, the Princess Knight, after accepting the role on Ada. And it was definitely a big leap for me. Not like a, I think that's normal trajectory for people, staff writer, story editor. If you have a show idea, you end up running a show or becoming a co-executive producer, executive producer. So that was big in the sense of, like I said, I'd been in the writer's room, just kind of writing scripts and going home. And then after that, took on a little bit more responsibility, being a story editor, taking on other people's scripts and having more of a leadership role. And then shifting to executive producer was definitely a job that I had to learn on the job. I learned that I had a lot of skills already that lent itself to that role, but there was also a lot that I had to learn. And Chris Nee, as my mentor, you know, from working on Doc McStuffins, was really kind of instrumental in helping to guide me in that way. And then I just had to, you know, figure out what my vision was for the show. And, you know, not just my vision, because one thing about this process is it's really collaborative. So we're working with we're working with Higher Ground, our producing partner, and my boss, Chris, you know, all kind of working collectively to figure out the best way to tell this story and to do the show. But it was also kind of up to me to determine, to kind of push it forward and determine what the overarching vision for the show was. And it was intense. I'm not gonna lie to you. It was really intense. We did it in the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
So we started on the show in, I think, October of 2019, and then we went into lockdown in March of 2020. So I have not been back to the office since. So we literally did the whole show in the pandemic, everything remotely.
So did it feel like just when you were finding your footing is when the pandemic hit?
Kinda, yeah.
Wow.
Yes. But what was cool was that we were all in it, you know, we're all in the pandemic. So it's not that, you know, I had any sort of extra burden that nobody else had, but it was interesting because we discovered that we could do stuff, you know, remotely that we didn't think we could do. And as animation was one of the mediums that could kind of, you know, continue during the pandemic, at least in the very beginning. But yeah, shifting into the executive producer role is definitely challenging, but I found that every single thing that I had done in my life had come into play in this role. Like I called on everything, you know. I'm the type of person that like to take random classes and whatever interests me. And so I took a couple art classes, you know, back in the day. I've taken whatever dance class, you know, various types of music. I started learning how to play the ukulele, and having to converse with the artists, that came in really handy. And having, you know, being able to talk to the artists in a language that it felt like it wasn't a foreign language to me. I could talk to them, and communicating with our songwriters and underscore composers. It felt like, you know, as a lifelong music lover, you know, of different kinds of music, and having played piano when I was really little, and, you know, my just interest in learning music came into play as well. And then also just learning from all of the showrunners that I've worked under, you know, the learning, just like observing them and learning how they do it and watching them move really helped and inspired me. And then, you know, kind of taking all that and then my own unique style organically kind of coming out of all of that stuff. So it was a big adventure. It was a big adventure for sure. I'm still on the show.
Well, you have such a genius way of talking about really integrating all these different disciplines, allowing your inspiration and curiosity to cross over in these different ways, and the power of sort of team and conversation. So thank you for that very inspiring look into Ada, and we are excited for the
Thank
next
you.
season.
Thank you.
So we're going to, I'm sure, return to you with some questions from the audience, but now we want to segue to Nick Yulo, and going from the world of animation to live action in terms of some of the films that she shared at NYICFF, although importantly, she's also working in illustration and children's books and gaming as well. So Nick, I am going to read a bit of your bio. Nick Yulo is a children's book author and writer-director whose work spans from film to picture books and video games, as I just mentioned. Her work has received an Alfred P. Sloan Screenwriting Award, an Adobe Design Achievement Award, a BAFTA Games Award, and has been recognized by the Sloan Film Summit, presented by Film Independent, NYICFF, Series Fest, and Shondaland. Her debut picture book, Patch of Sky, which brings easy STEM concepts to life for very young readers, will be published by Dial Books in July 2022. So welcome, Nick.
Thank you for having me.
It's so great to see you. We were graced with your presence in person during NYICFF's festival.
Yes, it was a wonderful experience. Thank you.
It was terrific to have you, but I'm excited to have you in this format, which we can expand out to even more folks across the country and internationally. Now we have a nice international presence. So Nick, you had not one, but two STEM inspired stories in NYICFF's Girls POV Science on Screen program. And you have a really interesting sort of backstory about your own explorations through science. So tell us about how your journey first started.
Sure. Well, I am another product of parents that didn't stop me, if that makes any sense. They were very encouraging in reading and me pursuing my interests, and my favorite rule in the house was my dad wouldn't buy me like all the toys I asked for, but he would never deny me a book that I asked for. So I, throughout the years, found like ways to exploit that rule. And so that sort of started the love of science, which is funny because I don't think I ever recall a moment in my life where I was like, I am going to pursue science as an interest. It was just always in the background of what I like to read. So it became a very natural progression. And I think that's one of the things that kids especially can fall into the trap of, where when you think about science, it can get very intimidating. And it really doesn't have to be. As Carrie said, like, science is in everything. So yes, they always encouraged me to follow my interests. And in college, I was fully intending to pursue something slightly more academic. So I was into archaeology and computer science, which makes sense to no one else but me. And then in my third year, I accidentally took a painting class, and that shifted my entire trajectory. And so now I tell stories for a living and make things up for a living.
And you also do some pretty deep science dives for a living and I think what's interesting in what you just relayed also is that you're interested in very like different kind of tonal thematic aspects of like where science and art intersect. So to give folks a little bit of a flavor of one of your live action films, we're going to share just a little bit of Horizon right now.
How much does this mission mean to you?
It means everything.
You are here because we're no longer constrained by the ghosts hidden in our genetics. You have the chance to explore beyond our solar system.
Can I do that with my own eyes?
We can't have a blind man in space.
They always look so smug afterwards.
They're next to launch.
3 days.
I don't think any of them have spoken a word to me since I started here.
That's because you're intimidating. I'm not helping.
I'm up for my last physical.
And you just had the procedure. If they gave you the choice.
Kepler, there is no other choice.
I can do this on my own.
Not if you want to be the first woman. There's only one seat on the horizon. Only the best will take it. Don't give them any more reason to pass you by. Besides, I want to see what they see.
Such a beautiful film, and obviously an intense one as well. Tell us about the really interesting themes that you're exploring in terms of inclusion in the sciences.
Yeah. While watching it back right now, I was nerding about it. It still gets my sort of interest going. So Horizon came about because I was reading a lot, like I usually do, and had stumbled on an article about how NASA astronauts were experiencing, like all people who were spending a certain amount of time in orbit were experiencing some form of muscular or macular degeneration. And their eyeballs were literally changing shape because of the lack of gravity, and their optic nerves were being affected. And these are things that persisted even when they returned home. And so I was thinking about that. And then I was trying to write my thesis. So all of that coalesced. And then I started to think of most of the things I like to do are not quite science fiction. They're more sort of speculative science based. So I like keeping my feet firmly on the ground and thinking about an interesting concept, but a possible one. So something more along the lines of what will happen in 5 to 10 years into the future, as opposed to 100 years in the future. So all of the technology in Horizon are based on real things that either exist now or are about to exist. And of course, so the first things that I do when I think of a film or a story I want to tell is, what is the framework of this world that I'm trying to build? And so I had the idea of, astronauts have a problem with their eyes. What would we as a society in 5 years think of a solution for this? How might we enhance astronauts to better themselves for space flight, particularly to uncharted space, because that involves a flight that is more than 6 months long. So then I had the framework. So now what is the character? And then the character of Kepler sort of spontaneously came up in my head. And so this is a woman who has this singular dream of wanting to launch into deep space, be the first woman launching into deep space, but knows full well that to be able to do that, she can't go without risking complete blindness unless she has enhancements added to her body. So then the question of like humanity, if something is physically taken away from me, what happens? What will I be like? What will the world look like on the other end of that? So all of that was sort of swimming around as I was making this film, and I'm really happy with how it turned out.
I think it's also interesting to just dig into your study of computer science, because there's definitely an aspect of this that also looks at sort of AI, the importance of examining AI, and also probably media literacy itself. So tell us a little bit about that side of it.
Yeah, so the other concurrent thing I was reading about at the same time, and it all sort of again coalesced, was how artificial intelligence was starting to be used in mourning or therapizing people who had gone through recent tragic deaths. Because we have, like, AI still has a lot of constraints, but we've gotten to the point where we can feed enough information into an artificial intelligence bot that they can start to emulate a person. And then we get into like, what are the ethical implications of emulating a person who no longer exists and how someone might form an attachment to someone who isn't real, or isn't real in the sense that we're used to thinking is real. So there is an artificial intelligence component in the film where you have a facility who, again, is enhancing astronauts to better them for space flight, but also is realizing that they need to be able to remind astronauts of why they're doing this in the first place. So there has to be that human component that they're trying to emulate, and whether or not they accomplish that successfully, I think is what I wanted to like explore in the film.
Fantastic. There's also this recurring theme of women in the sciences. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about Nights in Newark and why that is such a feature to you of your storytelling.
Yeah, I think in general, it just everything that I do comes from a hunger growing up of not seeing women that looked like me in the stories that I was reading, particularly in STEM related stories that I was reading. Nights in Newark, I was working with a writer, so it was a collaboration with a writer, but that one focused on a little girl who had a knack for engineering, but what also, this was the height of when ICE was really active, and her parents are undocumented immigrants, but she's an American citizen. So there's this sort of crucible that she has to go through every day where she's the only one who can safely leave her house and buy groceries and come back. But whenever she has to do that trip, her parents get very scared that she won't come back. And then she sort of lives in this magical, realistic, fantastical world where she just wants to solve the problem of making the knights that has infiltrated her neighborhood go away. And her solution to that is building a tower on the top of her apartment building that will serve as a beacon to let all of the parents that are disappearing find their way home. So most of the things that I do have a kind of, whether it's science fiction or not, have a sort of fairy tale component and a strong undercurrent of hope, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really interesting as to how you always, even in these intense stories, find this way of centering agency and of a young person tapping into their agency.
Yeah,
And
I really enjoyed working on both projects.
Fantastic. I'm also curious from a practical level for the filmmakers out there or emerging creators, if you could share how you shift in terms of different age ranges. I know that, now you're working on a book that's STEM related for younger audiences. Nights in New York was a bit younger, focused in terms of the protagonist centered. And so how do you take, these stories with a lot of integrity and really think about what the age range is? Do you think about that? Do you conceive of them for different age ranges?
Now I'm wondering if I do think about that. I think the story, the emotional through line, I think what I'm trying to say tends to tell me or give me an idea what age range it should fall under. And most of my things, I think, fall under younger audiences, because they're, again, when you're working with fairy tales and you want to tell hopeful stories, and there's just a lot more leeway that I think younger audience will give you when you present them a world. Like, they take them much more readily than an adult would. I think it's far more exciting for me to write a fairy tale than it is a more adult story. But there isn't really a science, to use the word, to figure out what age range I like to do. For the most part, they've just all fallen for younger audiences for some reason. And I think that's partly because of the reactions I get to. Like, there's nothing that beats a kid reacting, like really connecting with what you're trying to say. Because at one point I was that kid. Like, it meant a lot to me to see these stories. So it's lovely to have that happen.
Yeah, and the power of audiences to see someone that looks like them represented on screen.
Yeah,
as well. And also the other side of that kind of how do you get it done question is talking about you as an independent filmmaker and how you actually find this bedrock of support and continue with it. I know that like the Sloan Foundation is wonderful in terms of really focusing on how science themed stories get told, but tell us about that whole process for you of finding a sort of constellation of support, be it in terms of practical funds or a whole community, or how do you do what you do? How do you keep it going? How do you?
I don't really know how to do what I do. I've been very fortunate in the past. There are, as you said, a lot of foundations that really want to promote STEM stories, that want to promote female directors. So I've been very lucky in being able to find all of those things. For the most part, I feel like people tend to sense enthusiasm. And when you're enthusiastic, people naturally become enthusiastic. If you find a way to be able to communicate what you are trying to say in the story and why you're excited about it and why you are the person that needs to tell this story, people come on board. I don't know why it happens, but they do. Again, I've been very, very fortunate. I think it's just a matter of, again, pursuing what interests you, because I don't think I'm particularly unique as a storyteller or a filmmaker, but that also on the other side is like, there are people out there who want these stories. Like if I tend to want to write stories for the kid that I was, and it just is a natural progression that the kid that I was is still out there. So that formula has always done me very well.
I like that. And you're also getting into some topical parallel universe propositions.
Yep.
Excellent. All right. It is time now to go to our audience Q&As, and I'm excited to open it up to everyone. And let's see. We have a question from Rebecca Zanola, who asks, what is the biggest challenge of telling these stories visually and accurately? So Nick, maybe let's start with you.
I feel like live action in general is very challenging. I mean, just on the practical standpoint, like I wanted things to be very realistic. So we had a scuba scene that I wanted in there because that is actual NASA training for astronauts. We simulated a centrifuge. Again, the ambition was out of this world. But again, I think when you're trying to figure these things out, things tend to, like, there's a lot of creative problem solving that comes into play when you're doing a live action film. And again, if you find a community that is very supportive, like you collectively tend to be able to find creative solutions for things. So like, while we did not have a full NASA cockpit, we had a bisection of a NASA cockpit that we framed very artfully that you would never know. So yeah, it's always a journey with every film, and I never come into something knowing exactly how I'm going to pull it off.
Fantastic. All right. Let's see. I have a question for Scott and Liam. What is the most accurate instance of STEM on screen that has impressed you?
Say that again.
What is the most accurate instance of STEM on screen that has impressed you? So maybe some other moment, you mentioned Iron Man, but something else that you perhaps watched with Liam as a kid, or Liam for you. I know since you think about this a lot. Any kind of stories that you feel like really nail either sort of evoking what you were talking about in terms of the challenges, you know, of it's not all ahas every day in the scientific process.
Yeah, Liam, is there
Tough questions, right? And I could always ask.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I still remain a very big fan of Japanese manga and anime even today. Most recently, the thing that I have been really interested in that I thought was just a very, very good representation of science in general in that field was this manga called Dr. Stone, which is kind of like the sort of general story is that this sort of young scientist wakes up basically in a world where like the entire world has been turned to stone. That's why they call it Dr. Stone. And he has to like recreate civilization from scratch. And they try to like basically build up each level of like scientific achievement over the course of like his lifetime. Sort of starting from like, how do you make fire? How do you make, you know, clay pots? How do you make soap, right? Stuff like that. And it's actually, they do a lot of science consulting. I sort of was like interested in this, and they try to be as accurate as possible, sort of in the same vein. And I thought that was a very wonderful representation because the character is very interesting, right? And the struggle is about, you know, at that point, it's about recreating knowledge from scratch, which was a very like, probably one of the most accurate representations of the scientific process, scientific method that I've seen in a while. And actually the first thing that I've ever seen that really takes like the methodology of generating new knowledge, right? Or recreating something from scratch and making that entertaining that I have seen recently. But that's, you know, it's sort of where all my general interests go is sort of in that field. So, you know, I don't have a like very broad spectrum sense of what's out there. So, but yeah.
That's okay. We have plenty of folks that are excited to dive deep into that. So Dr. Stone, and I like that that theme of really like looking at scientific methodology. And so a question for Carrie. Carrie, how do you go about representing both like the developmental aspects of like sharing knowledge in childhood with the scientific ones? I think you do, like, even when you said, you know, the importance of celebrating and how you like to celebrate these moments, there are great moments in Ada Twist in which they have challenges, you know, they talk about like needing to take a moment and then remembering to brainstorm. And there are these wonderful parallels that are both about sort of the scientific process and methodologies, and also just like developmental stages for kids that are important to note. So tell us about how do you choose how to represent challenges to kids, I guess is the simplest way to ask it.
Well, early on, we knew that we wanted failure and the idea of failure to be a big theme in the series. We kind of discussed the fact that science is one of the last disciplines to celebrate failure, and so it became a part, like it built in into the show. We even have Ada say, the kids say a lot, you know, we don't quit because we've got grit, you know, because, and so we
the importance of rhyme too, right?
Exactly, got to rhyme.
Love it.
So I think since we're making a preschool show that kids will enjoy first and connect to first, we wanted to make sure that the science ideas and concepts we were talking about kind of connected or dovetailed with just kid stuff, you know, stuff that kids are experience or going through, like failure, like, and then connecting that to the characters specifically. So like Ada, you know, is a perfectionist and she always wants things to be perfect and she won't quit until it's perfect, or even sometimes start until it's perfect. So that's sometimes we explored a couple episodes where that was naturally woven into the science that they were kind of exploring or discovering. We have this one episode where Ada gets embarrassed in class. She's giving a presentation or a demo and she gets embarrassed and she decides the only thing to do is go back in time to prevent it from ever happening in the first place. And so we explore the idea of what would it look like to build a time machine? What does that even mean? And then the challenge was, that's a really high concept thing, and then distilling it for 5-year-olds. So that was really challenging. Also, we didn't have, one of our hardest episodes we ever did was about glitter. And the idea started with that glitter is a thing that parents complain that they can never get out of anything. So then we started with glitter, and then it was such a challenging episode because we like to distilling the science of glitter and why glitter sticks to everything and you can never get it off, with the concept of magnetism, and try not to be confusing about glitter versus magnets was really hard. So then we had a running joke in the room where we'd say, is it hard or is it glitter hard? Because that was,
love it.
Yeah. So yeah, we started with, you know, like Rosie is this fearless, rambunctious character, but we found out she was afraid of one thing, storms. So then that episode became about when you learn about something, you're less likely to fear it because now you have information about it. So that directly dovetailed with her fear and not wanting, you know, wanting to hide even from the storm, even though they were inside. And then we have this one episode where Iggy is, like I said, his parents are divorced and he shuttles back and forth between homes. And we have this one episode where he forgets his things because he doesn't, you know, he goes to both of their homes, so he doesn't know where he leaves his stuff. And then we use that episode to explore the science of memory. So that's kind of where we start. It's sometimes we start with the kid problem, sometimes we start with the science, but always we try to connect those two things.
That's so fantastic. I'm taking notes down. I got a little star on celebrating failure and is it hard or is it glitter hard? But you do such a beautiful job at really digging into, you know, the challenges that kids face, but that we all face. And I just imagine like this really rich viewing experience for parents and kids to be watching together and both having different sort of emotional connections and celebrations of like challenge at its essence. So that's so beautiful.
Yeah, that's what we hope.
Well, you're doing it. All right, we have one last question for Nick. It's probably all we have time for. Conchita wants to ask, is there a film or TV show that influenced your interest in STEM?
How much time do you have? There were a lot. Again, I was never.
I know, is that Jules Verne back there? I'm like, maybe that's what's good.
I was never thinking of like STEM versus not STEM. The earliest things that I
Excellent.
remember really falling into were like Encyclopedia Brown books and Sherlock Holmes. So these are all books that involved like deduction and sort of the scientific method. And then the Magic School Bus was a thing that was also a big thing in my life. And then just again watching anything that remotely interested me. And that includes playing games, because I think one of the things that tends to be overlooked and shouldn't be is the avenue of like video games as a storytelling medium. I feel like there have been leaps and bounds in the last few years, particularly for science fiction games. Like Returnal won the BAFTA Game Award this year. And that was about an astronaut getting abandoned in a planet, and it's fascinating. But again, like science is in everything. I just picked up whatever book was remotely related and read it.
Although I would add maybe science is in everything, because that's kind of what you're saying, right? There's not a distinction. Well, I'm so sad to be wrapping up right now because this has been such a joyful panel. And I just want to thank all of you, the four of you, for really bringing joy to science, for helping us to celebrate creativity and challenges and failure even in science and the arts. And I think that it's really inspired a lot of us to sort of to get rid of the divide and to just be curious and ask questions and not get stuck in categories, but really to go out there and support kids and families and audiences and educators in sharing your enthusiasm. So we do have a little something up our sleeves at NYICFF. We are planning to work on a film-based program and curriculum for next year that we hope can share some of these stories and certainly share the brilliance of what you all do. So thank you for being so inspiring and for joining us today, everyone.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
It's fantastic.
Fantastic.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we're looking forward to season 2 of Ada Twist. We're looking forward to a new book from Nick. We're looking forward to some important and very life-changing discoveries from Liam. And we're looking forward to some amazing plays and productions from Scott, and to more continued support with your vision and sharing it at NYICFF as well. And so thank you, everyone. It's been a joy to do this industry forum again. It's such an important part of what we do. You know, we're so happy to serve kids and families, but it's wonderful to be able to discuss among peers and really encourage a more inclusive children's media industry. So thank you everyone for joining us. Make sure to sign up for our emails if you haven't already. Come back and take a look at some of the programs we have upcoming in the fall. Hopefully some special things popping up in summer, but thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon, evening, what have you. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.